shit because the people that are alive are just as dangerous as the dead people.
Right.
Dawn of the Dead highlights that with the the marauders that are there trying to basically pillage and plunder what they have in the mall there. And I think that started with Dawn of the Dead. It's the Mad Max idea that the people that survive the apocalypse are just as dangerous as anything else you'll encounter.
True, I agree. And as far as Walking Dead, I can't really speak too much to that because I'm so far behind on that show. I'm embarrassed to even say, but because of
about 4 seasons for me. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, because of my books and my convention schedule and all that stuff. I think the last season I watched was season 3, Lord of the Governor. So when the governor gets killed, that's the last thing.
I think me too. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think maybe a little bit of the season after that, but that was it. But yeah, Vic, when you think of zombie movies, when you think of Romero zombie movies, which one immediately comes to mind for you? Is it Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, or a different one?
It's always Night of the Living Dead for me, just because to me that's it. You know what I'm saying? That's what started it all. So that's what I always go back to.
I know you didn't do what I did Sunday, but if you had, would that have been the movie that you popped in, or would you have went with whatever one's your favorite?
I would have went with Night, no doubt about it.
It's interesting, Blake. Blake, do you feel this way too? Like that you would have popped in Night if you were going to homage Romero, or would you have gone with a movie outside of the zombie genre? Because I know there's some others that you could argue are just as good or better that he did.
Well, believe it or not, if it was going to be a zombie one, it probably would have been Night of the Living Dead. But if it would have been my choice non-zombie, I would have probably went with either Creepshow or The Dark Half, just because Creepshow, even though he didn't technically write it, part of its success is because of his direction and his dictating skills. I mean, that's probably the one I would have went with if it wouldn't have been Night of the Living Dead. It would have been Creepshow.
I think I talked about this on the Night of the Living Dead show we did, but the interesting thing about Night of the Living Dead and all these others is, you think about zombies and you think Halloween, but Night of the Living Dead's the only one that I associate with Halloween. And I think the reason why that is, well, for one thing, okay, Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, like you said, most of it takes place during the day. You don't get a Halloween vibe from that, I don't feel like.
No.
Day of the Dead, they're underground. And other than the fact that you have a calendar that has all the days in October marked off, you don't really get a Halloween vibe from that one either. But I always say this. When it was 2009, and I know this because I looked it up on YouTube, AMC, whenever they're doing, Fright Fest, they always do Fright Fest every year. Well, on AMC, is it Fright Fest or is it Monster Fest? I can't remember.
I think it's
Fright Fest.
Fest.
I thought. Right. So, 2009, they did Night of the Living Dead, a nonstop marathon of it, Halloween night. And Romero was talking about the movie and stuff during, whenever they'd come in from commercial breaks. And I remember watching it all that night, finally going to bed, way into it, because I had watched it 12 times that day. And the thing about it was that they had this commercial just talking about Night of the Living Dead, and they still have that on YouTube. So if you look it up, you'll see what always connects me between Night of the Living Dead and Halloween. There's really no other connection there other than the fact that it's black and white, and it could be any time of the year. Something about that movie connects with Halloween for me. I don't know what it is beyond that. But yeah, so Night of the Living Dead's special to me in that way. So if I want horror, Night of the Living Dead's horror, and the other ones, they're loosely horror. I mean, because Dawn of the Dead, it's got so many goofy moments. Yeah, it's hard to call that even horror. Day of the Dead, kind of scary, but it more is about awesome makeup effects and shit. So I don't know. That's me. I love Day though. But anyway, moving on after Dawn, which a lot of people think is the best of the whole series, and a lot of people, that's the one that they go to as the top zombie movie of all time. Not necessarily me, but it is awesome. I mean, it was shot on a budget of $500,000 and made over $55 million internationally. That's pretty fucking awesome. So.
Oh yeah, for the time period especially.
And then we hit another kind of clunker to me, Night Riders, like we talked about, 1981. I own that movie, and I really don't have a use for it. I'll probably never watch it again. It is a weird premise. It's these bunch of bikers, and they're doing like King Arthur stuff, like jousts and stuff. It is weird, and I don't really ever need to see it again. Ed Harris is in it, and of course Savini's in it too. Because why wouldn't he be?
On the Comment Network the other night, I turned it on because I remember seeing some guy on a motorcycle with this big King Arthur style jousting. I was like, what the hell is this? You know, it's late at night, so I turned it on, and I was like, Night Riders? The first thing I thought was, you know, the Hasselhoff. Maybe it was like an offshoot of that, and I turned on and said, well, no, this isn't David Hasselhoff, that's for damn sure. And then it didn't really give me much info about it, and it really didn't look all that interesting, so I just turned it. But I thought it was weird looking, you know.
It wasn't good. It's just my opinion. It wasn't good. I tried to make it good. It was not horror, and it wasn't anything good. So I think that was a Romero flop. But, you know, everybody has theirs.
Yep.
So then we go to 82, and this, like you said, is one of the better ones. In fact, it's probably the best one, period, that he directed outside of the zombie genre, and that's Creepshow. I mean, let's think about this, and Blake, you tell me if I'm wrong, but as far as directors go, they didn't have a whole lot of collaborations before this for these types of movies. This was kind of it was kind of a pioneer in its own way, you know, these anthology movies.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and it obviously paved the way for Creepshow 2, and I even would like to venture to say Tales from the Hood was probably influenced by Creepshow because of the slapsticky kind of, you know, kitschy sort of 1950s, 60s comic book horror, the old EC comics. But, you know, yeah, that's I would agree. And this is the one. This one is one that he actually directed and he edited it. So that's kind of letting you see more of Romero as the filmmaker instead of the writer. He's known for creating and directing and writing Night of the Living Dead, but he was an editor and a director on Creepshow. And Creepshow did so well that, you know, 2 years later there was a sequel that came out that did fairly well, you know. So
yeah, I think that speaks to the level of genius of Romero, that he was able to do multiple things, like a Carpenter, who was able to compose and write and direct. You know, it takes a certain talent to be able to do more than one thing on a movie, and Romero is one of those talents, and I feel like a lot of times he got pigeonholed so much that he was never able to do some of the things that he wanted to. Plus, he was never given fucking budgets, man. These movies, they're low budget, just about all of them. I mean, I think Day had a pretty good budget, but still not as much as he had asked for, and he cut a bunch of it.
Right. Yeah, but that was the problem with a lot of the early horrors. I mean, Friday the 13th, and I mean, obviously the budget for Halloween was what, $300,000, and about $100,000 of that went to Donald Pleasance. You know.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean that was the problem with a lot of these early things, but it also showcased the directors and producers and writers' ability to make a good scare on a limited budget, which went on to say that if they got a bigger budget, that the expectation will be lifted even higher. Because, you know, as far as people that do multiple things, I put Romero, Carpenter, and Craven. Cunningham comes in fourth, you know, whatever. But those three especially, because, you know, Carpenter, like you said, was a director and a composer. And then, you know, you had Craven, who was the director, and he wrote Nightmare on Elm Street, you know, in addition to directing the first one. And then he was an executive producer on a couple of them. And then he directed, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And then, of course, you've got, you know, Romero with his writing and directing. There's only 2 or 3 names I think of when it comes to mind of what I like to call multitasking, you know, geniuses when it comes to horror filmmaking. And those are the guys right there, man. It's Romero and Carpenter and Craven.
In the 80s, because it was such a, I don't know, passé subject, you know, horror, that you had to do all that shit. They weren't giving you money to do it, so you had to do it yourself. So, I mean, this is when you had real talent back then. I think we're getting there again. I think people like Adam Green, you know, if they don't get turned off to shit like this because of the studios and just them being worthless, I mean, these are the next generation of people like that. Because I think we hit an era for a while there of guys who were just directing horror movies and not so much doing the other things. And that may change if we can ever get some of these guys a budget to work with, or at least a decent budget and a theatrical release. Seems like theatrical releases for good horror movies are slim and none these days. But anyway.
Well, I mean,
so
that makes sense. That makes sense. But today, a perfect example, I don't consider this movie horror, but on the Talk today, it comes on Channel 5 where I live. They had Ian Ziering and Tara Reid on. They were making a Sharknado 5, and they're like, coming up this weekend on sci-fi, and I was like, I remember a time when a movie like that would have, if it was good, would have been in the theaters, and they were making such a stink about Sharknado, and I'm like, the movie wasn't even in theaters. It's made for cable cheese. It's like Tremors, but less good, you know?
Yes.
I don't get it.
I can't wait to see Tremors again. But okay, so we go to, and Vic, I want to ask you this question. All right, Vic, and tell me if I'm wrong. Okay, you always say you're not a fan of the zombie genre, but then there's the rare exceptions, and usually they're comedy ones. Now, like Return of the Living Dead, Shaun of the Dead, and Zombieland. But I think Day of the Dead is one of those few that's not a zombie comedy that you actually would put in your exception category. Am I right?
You're 100% correct. I absolutely.
But there's some funny shit in that movie, to be fair. You know what I mean? Joe Pilato is funny as hell.
It is. I love Day. It's an amazing movie. Because as the world knows, I'm not a huge zombie guy. Let's say it's comedy, blah blah blah. But I love Day. That is the exception. So yes, you're correct, sir.
To be fair to everybody who's listening, don't think that Vic's just discriminating against zombies. He doesn't like werewolves or vampires either. Vic is not a classic monsters type of guy. He's all about, slashers. And slashers.
Yeah.
And I think slashers also. Yeah. So.
Yes. I mean, slashers. I kind of dig slashers in case people didn't understand that.
A few ghosts here and there and some torture porn.
That's funny that y'all say that, though, because when I was up there, torture porn. When I was up there in Vegas, Cheney's family was there, and we were at an after party, and Cheney's great-grandson comes up to me, and he's like, I bought your book. I love it. And I was like, your great-grandfather basically paved the way for monster movies. And I'm sitting there thinking, it's like, I'm sitting there thinking Vic would appreciate this, but probably not on the same level that everybody that were werewolf and vampire lovers would, because and that's fine. Everybody has their own thing, You're like me, you like slashers, and that's cool. But it was just so weird because I'm sitting here, drinking. That's one of the few times I ever got just fucking hammered while I was up there, and was hanging out with him, and I was like, you know what, hanging out with Lon Chaney's family, and I was like, man, I really need to go back and watch some more monster stuff, But it's just so hard to find on DVD where the quality of it is not grainy because transfers and all that stuff from the old footage.
And let's be honest, we can get most new horror movies, things like that for $5 to $10. Those fucking Universal movies are expensive. They never put out easy editions to buy. You know what I mean?
No,
they're always at least $20.
Yep, that's true. And Chaney was in so many of them. He was the first, if I'd like to say, besides Jack Pierce, one of the first actors and makeup artists, that did his own makeup. Most makeup people, most actors don't do their own makeup, and he did. So he sort of pioneered the Dick Smith and the Tom Savini and the Rob Bottin and the Steve Johnsons and the Nick Bensons and everybody else that we've had on, and it's amazing to sit and think about how far the movies have come, but those movies still hold up today. As old and antiquated and dated as they are, if I watch Phantom of the Opera, that still creeps me out, even today,
Yeah, Cheney was the man. But to get back to, I suppose we'll get to, let's see here, after Day of the Dead. By the way, again, I'll reiterate, Day of the Dead is my favorite Romero movie. It's my, I don't know if I can call it my favorite zombie movie. Return of the Living Dead might be my favorite. I'm not sure, but I love the shit out of Day of the Dead. It's my favorite Romero movie. He wasn't
involved with that one, was he? He wasn't involved with Return of the Living Dead. Right?
No, I think it was John Russo who was involved with Night of the Living Dead with Romero. So, you know what I mean?
That movie was informed by Romero, though, even though he had no clear ties to it other than Russo.
Yeah, him and Russo, they had a falling out there for a long time, I think. I think they finally buried the hatchet, I hope. But
that sounds
familiar.
Yeah. Bob Shea and Wes Craven.
Exactly. It really just boils down to it's like Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon. You know what I mean? People taking credit for, it's like, Jesus Christ, you can share the wealth. You know what I mean? Just share the wealth.
I was thinking Jake the Snake and The Undertaker, actually.
Fair enough. So, okay, so after 85, we don't get anything from Romero for 3 years. And I watched the movie earlier today. Blake referenced it earlier. I remember this movie from being a kid, which